Hello everyone, my name is Tsuki and welcome to my guide to the White Mage, one of 3 healers currently in Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood. This guide will be primarily aimed at beginner and intermediate players who are looking to pick up the job or are just starting off with Final Fantasy XIV for the first time. This guide will cover a lot of things and will consequently be fairly long, so there will be timestamps in the description of the video if you would like to jump to a certain section of the guide. Out of the 3 current healers, White Mage is the most powerful healer, possessing a wide variety of spells and abilities that focus on restoring HP, and being able to choose the right one to use in any given situation is a key part of playing the job properly. However, they lack of damage mitigation tools and any kind of party supplements that the other 2 healers can bring. White Mage at its core is very simple and straightforward. I personally find White Mage to be extremely reliable and satisfying to play, and I've seen the job through all of its iterations since A Realm Reborn. In my opinion, this is the most fun the job has been so far, and I'm happy to finally finish making an updated guide for it. Okay, the first thing I like to look over in all of my guides are all of the spells and abilities available to you. I'll be looking at the best forms of each spell and ability, so if a trait adds some additional effect, I'll be sure to include those in the description. And our first ability is Stone. This deals earth damage with a potency of 140 to a single target. All the stone spells are pretty self-explanatory. This will just be your filler damage when you don't need to be casting any damage over time abilities. Next up is Cure, which heals a single target with a potency of 450. Using Cure will also grant you 1 Lily on your healing gauge, a mechanic that we'll talk about later, and will also have a 15% chance of granting you a 15-second buff that will make your next Cure 2 cost no MP. This should be your initial choice for healing small to moderate amounts of damage. It will increase your Lily count, and having that chance of a free Cure 2 will help with conserving MP during single target healing. If you happen to crit with Cure, there's also a 20% chance that you'll reduce the cooldown of Asylum or Size by 5 seconds due to the Secret of the Lily 2 trait. Arrow is a single target damage over time spell that deals 50 potency initially and will deal an additional 30 potency every few seconds for 18 seconds. The total potency will be 230. It is also instant cast, which is great for giving you opportunities to position yourself better, to cast while moving, or to use an ability in between your global cooldowns without clipping. This should be applied to high HP targets before using your stone spells as filler damage. Medica is a healing spell that will restore the HP of you and your party members around you with a potency of 300. This is your standard AoE healing spell, and while it is good practice to use it when there is a small amount of HP missing from multiple party members, many White Mages will usually use one of the other 2 AoE healing spells over this one, but I'll better explain the differences when we get to the healing section of the guide. Fluid Aura is an ability that will knock back a target and bind them in place for 6 seconds. Prior to Stormblood, this also had a damage component attached to it, and it has since been removed, making it pure utility. As for the situations where this can be useful, it can be good if you're getting swarmed doing solo content and you just need some breathing room. You can also use it to push a ranged enemy into the range of your tank. However, the use of this ability in a party usually causes more annoyance than anything else. And personally, I haven't used this ability once since Stormblood launched. Stone 2 will replace Stone once you reach level 18 and will now deal a single target attack with a potency of 200, up from 140. Repose will cast Sleep on a target for 30 seconds. This effect will end prematurely if the target is attacked. While this has limited uses in party play, when you're solo and maybe pull too many mobs for you to handle, being able to take an enemy or 2 out of the battle can be useful then. Cure 2 will heal a single target with a potency of 700 and will also add a Lily to your healing gauge. This should be your go-to choice for healing targets who have taken a moderate to large amount of damage. It does cost significantly more MP to cast than Cure, but it can be argued that in fights where MP is likely not an issue, that it is more time efficient to only use Cure 2 and forgo the use of Cure to fit in more damage spells. We'll discuss this point later on, and like Cure, if you crit with this spell, there's a 20% chance to reduce Asylum or Size's cooldown by 5 seconds due to the Secret of the Lily 2 trait. Presence of Mind is a 15-second buff that will reduce the cast and recast time of your spells by 20%. It also reduces the delay between auto attacks, which is pretty laughable, but it does do that as well. This has a cooldown of 2.5 minutes. This ability is very versatile and can be great in a variety of situations. This can be useful when you need to output a lot of heals in a short span of time, or it can be used as a DPS tool to output more damaging spells instead. The lengthy cooldown can discourage lots of people from using it, but as long as you are mindful, you should be trying to use this ability a few times during each encounter. Regen is an instant cast healing spell that will put a healing over time effect on a single target that will heal them for 150 potency every few seconds for 21 seconds. The total potency will be 1050, much higher than Cure 2. This spell is amazing and is great for placing on party members that will be taking constant damage over its duration, or to put onto party members that have taken a large amount of damage but don't need their HP immediately topped off. Keeping this constantly on the main take is good practice, as it is a great supplement to your cure spells, and it is also extremely MP efficient. Cure 3 is a spell that will trick a lot of people who are too lazy to read their tooltips. Initial thoughts would make it seem like Cure 3 is an even stronger single target heal than Cure 2, but it is actually an extremely potent close range AoE healing spell. It will heal all party members around the target for a potency of 550. Unlike most other AoE healing spells in the game, this one is actually targetable rather than just originating from you, although you can just target yourself for consistency's sake. Also, unlike other AoE healing spells, it only has a radius of 6 yalms as opposed to the standard 15 yalms. This means you'll need your party to stack up fairly close to affect everyone. However, this is a great spell for healing a big chunk of HP to everyone with a single spell if you can get your party to stack in close. Holy is an AoE damaging ability that originates around you. It deals potency of 200 for the first enemy, while having a gradual drop off in damage for each subsequent enemy within range, and capping at half potency for the 6th enemy and beyond. It will also stun all enemies hit for 4 seconds until they gain a stun resistance. This spell is amazing for AoE damage. It does a decent amount of damage, and the stun can act as a form of damage mitigation for your tank, which will allow you to safely get off even more cast of Holy before your tank actually needs to start getting heals. The biggest downside to using this ability is the high MP cost, but as we'll soon see, Might Mage has a lot of tools for managing MP in this expansion that, if used properly, the MP drain from using this spell multiple times can be easily mitigated. At level 46, Arrow 2 will replace Arrow and will now deal an initial potency of 50 with an additional 50 potency every few seconds for 18 seconds. The total potency will be up to 350 from 230. And at level 50, we'll get access to Medica 2, every white mage's favorite spell. It is an AoE healing spell that will heal you and your party around you for an initial 200 potency, and will also add a regen effect that heals an additional 50 potency every few seconds for 30 seconds. That is a total potency of 700, which is basically equivalent to casting Cure 2 on every single party member. Now, this spell is amazing for dealing with moderate or constant AoE damage, and even for even larger amounts of damage, it can be easily supplemented by adding a Medica or a Cure 3 on top of it. However, it is only most effective if you actually allow the heal to last its full duration. While clipping the regen of Medica 2 can be helpful at times depending on the situation, for the majority of cases you do not want to be spamming this and clipping Medica 2, otherwise you'll pretty much be wasting the potential of this spell. However, Medica 2 also has the benefit of reaching 20 yalms opposed to the standard 15 yalms that other AoE heals have. And this is actually a really big part of why I personally consider this a great choice, even if I know the party might be overhealed by the tail end of the regen. While I personally cast Medica 2 a ton because I just love this spell, I will say that it is usually best to use another healing tool if you do not need most of Medica 2's massive potency. However, having those regens rolling on everyone can help with mitigating any damage party members may take unexpectedly, but still, you want to try your best not to overheal too much, although I am guilty of using this spell a lot and overhealing quite a bit using it as well, so do as I say, not as I do. But honestly, Medica 2, it's really good. Even if you do end up overhealing a little bit at the end, it's usually worth it because this spell is really actually quite MP efficient, and the fact that it is a regen spreads out all of the enmity you'll be getting. Just please don't cast this pre-pull. There's no reason to. Please don't. Most AoE damage that comes in a fight will come at a predetermined time, and that usually is never at the beginning of the fight, so please do not cast this pre-pull like some white mages I see in the Duty Finder do. Please don't do that. Please. and the other ability you'll be learning at level 50 is Benediction, the strongest heal in the game. This ability will fully heal a single target to their maximum HP, however it does have a lengthy cooldown of 3 minutes. A special thing to note about this ability is that it is now the only percentage based heal left in the game, and therefore can bypass any debuffs that may lower your outgoing heals, or any debuffs that might lower your target's incoming heals. Also, another note is that while this ability is instant cast, there will be a slight delay before the heal registers, so do be prepared and try not to cast this ability too late and lose both your party member and this spell for its cooldown. Moving on to Heaven's Word abilities now, our next ability is Asylum, which is a targeted ground AoE. Placing this down will heal any party member inside for 100 potency every few seconds for 24 seconds. If you stand in it for its full duration, it is an 800 potency heal. It has a 90-second cooldown. This ability is great for supplementing AoE heals against constant or even large spikes in damage. When you don't need it for AoE healing, however, you can still use it just for single target healing on the tank. Just place it down where the tank is standing, and it'll work just as any other regen would. Asylum is also one of the abilities that can be used with Lilies to reduce its cooldown. Again, we'll talk about Lilies and the healing gauge once we're done with the spells and abilities section of this guide. At level 54, Stone 3 will replace Stone 2 and will now deal 210 potency up from 200. It's a DPS gain. Okay. And next is a Size, an ability with a lot of amazing benefits, thankfully a lot more flashier than Stone 3. It heals all nearby party members with a potency of 300, damages all nearby enemies with a potency of 300, and also restores 10% of your maximum MP pool. This sits on a minute cooldown, but it is also one of the abilities that you can use with Lilies to further reduce its cooldown. It really goes without saying that this ability is amazing. In fact, it is my favorite ability on White Mage. This ability is extremely versatile, being a great supplement for AoE damage, a great supplement for AoE healing, and it is good for restoring your MP. You should try your best to keep this ability on cooldown to get the most out of its MP restoration, although if you know you might need the extra healing or extra damage soon, then it might be worth holding onto it for a specific part of a fight, although it does have a pretty short cooldown, so don't hold on to it too often. Arrow 3 is an AoE damage spell that will deal an initial potency of 50 and will also add a damage over time effect that deals 40 potency for 24 seconds. The total potency is 370. This is great for AoE damage, but it is also worth casting for single target DPS along with Arrow 2 before using stone spells for filler. Tetragrammaton is another healing ability that cures a single target for 700 potency and sits on a minute cooldown. Its cooldown can also be further reduced by Lilies. Tetragrammaton acts as sort of a mini benediction, and it is great for supplementing large spikes in damage, or it can be used to spot heal unexpected damage a party member took. And moving on to the new Stormblood abilities, we have Thin Air. Starting off strong, this buff will last 12 seconds and will make all of your spells cost 0 MP and only has a 2-minute cooldown. This ability is amazing and has very many versatile uses. Good use of this spell, or I guess ability, can allow you to get several free holy spells off, and it can also completely mitigate the huge loss of MP from casting Raise. During high AoE damage, this buff can also help conserve a lot of MP, allowing the spamming of your most powerful heals for no MP cost. This ability is great and will play a huge part in conserving your MP in the long run. At level 64, Stone 4 will replace Stone 3 and will now deal 350 potency up from 310. 40 potency increase this time, so you know. Thumbs up. Divine Benison will replace a shield around a party member that absorbs damage equal to 15% of that person's maximum HP. This will last for 15 seconds or until it is broken, and has a cooldown of 30 seconds. This ability, it's pretty great. Originally, this ability needed at least one Lily in your healing gauge to be able to be casted, but now no longer requires any. However, it does still use Lilies to reduce its already short cooldown, which I personally consider to be quite wasteful, since most tank busters are already more than 30 seconds apart anyway. But that minor inconvenience isn't large enough to detract from how amazing this ability actually is. This is extremely useful for helping tanks absorb the massive damage of tank busters, but when you do not need this for tank busters, it can still be a great tool for halting incoming damage on your tank long enough for you to get your healing spells off, even during something like large dungeon pulls. This is White Mage's answer to barrier mitigation, and while it isn't as consistent as Adloquium or Aspected Benefic, it helps fill the void left behind by the removal of Stone Skin, and has the benefit of being an instant cast ability rather than a spell. Planetary Indulgence, it's an interesting ability. When you heal HP with the use of Medica, Medica 2, or Cure 3, all party members healed will receive a Confession stack. These stacks only last for 10 seconds before wearing off or being refreshed by another AoE heal. When the party has Confession stacks, Planetary Indulgence will heal each party member based on the amount of stacks they have. 150 for 1 stack, 300 potency for 2, and 450 potency for 3. This ability has its uses, but rarely sees its full potential. It can be great for helping you squeeze out a little more healing without having to cast a whole other Medica. However, I've never actually gotten more than 2 stacks of Confession and actually used this ability on those 2 stacks. The nature of this ability means you need to use 3 AoE heals and then still somehow need to heal more after that for it to be used at its absolute best. But even with only 1 stack, adding 150 potency onto the tail end of your Medica 2 or Cure 3 is sometimes all you really need, and this ability can really just be nice to have. Not amazing like a lot of the other abilities on White Mage, but it is still nice, and it has its uses at times. And now that we've finished with all the White Mage's spells and abilities, we can move on to their role actions. These are a collection of tools divided for the differing roles in the game, and you'll be able to select any 5 of these and switch them around outside of combat at any time. If you've played White Mage prior to Stormblood, however, you'll notice that many of these role actions for healers were really just stripped off of White Mage to be put in here. So in all actuality, you're not really getting much of anything new, but let's talk about them and see what's changed with these abilities since then. Cleric Stance now is a flat 5% damage buff for 15 seconds that has a 90-second cooldown. With healer damage now scaling off of mine, the days of stance dancing are now over, and Cleric Stance is now just a nice ability to have to help you output a little bit more damage. It isn't necessary by any means, but it is a solid choice if you won't need the other tools available. Break is a spell that will add a heavy effect to the target and deals a small amount of damage. I've never actually had any use for this spell, and unless they add a fight where slowing an enemy's movement speed is vital, I don't think we will ever need to take this at all. So yeah, take that as you will. Protect increases the magic and physical defense of all party members and will last for 30 minutes. This spell no longer has an MP cost as well. It should go without saying that there is no reason for this to not be casted at the start of a pull on all party members. However, after it is cast, it is then up to you if you would like to keep Protect in the event that somebody dies and you'd like to cast it on them again, or if you would prefer to switch it out for some other role action. Since this spell no longer has an MP cost, all you will be wasting by casting it again is a GCD, and if no one dies during the fight, this spell essentially has no use. Keeping this spell in your pocket is really just a safety net, but you could find better things to replace it with if you don't think you will need it. Isuna will remove a single detrimental effect from a party member. This spell is absolutely mandatory for certain fights, but may be completely pointless in others. As a general rule of thumb, you should be taking Isuna if you are experiencing a fight for the first time, or if you cannot recall if a fight has any dispellable effects. If you can confidently confirm that a fight has no use for this spell, then it is okay to replace it with another ability. When you do take it, however, be mindful of what it is you are actually trying to dispel. Debuffs that can be dispelled will have a small line above the icon to notify you that they can be dispelled. If there is no line, then they are not able to be dispelled, so you should not be wasting your MP casting Isuna. You should also ask yourself if the debuff you're going to dispel is actually worth the MP to cast. Certain debuffs, such as poisons, can sometimes just be healed through, and sometimes the debuff might wear off really quickly and you might not even want to bother casting Isuna at all. Just be a little smart and conserve your MP where you can. Lucid Dreaming is simply a better replacement for Shroud of Saints. Like the old Shroud, Lucid will have your enmity while putting a refresh effect on yourself that restores your MP over 21 seconds, and this sits on a 2-minute cooldown. Now the tooltip is rather unclear, but each tick of regen should give you 960 MP at max level, and over its full duration this will restore 6720 MP. You should be trying your best to use this ability so that you're not wasting any of the MP gained, and then using it periodically on cooldown to help sustain your MP and keep your enemy low over the course of a fight. Swift Cast will allow your next spell to be cast instantly and sits on a minute cooldown. This is an extremely versatile tool, allowing you to output your most potent spells instantly and also freeing up moments for extra mobility. It is also essential to use when you decide to raise a downed party member to negate the long cast time of raise. Even though White Mage does have a handful of abilities to help keep them healing while on the move, this ability is especially useful for getting out a quick AoE heal during movement intensive phases. Eye for an Eye will place a barrier around a party member that has a 20% chance to trigger a debuff on any enemy that attacks that party member. This debuff will reduce that enemy's damage dealt by 10% for 10 seconds. This ability sits on a 3-minute cooldown. While there is some practical use for this ability, I myself do not take it very often. It is most effective to place on your tank while doing large pulls, but the chances of this triggering against only a single enemy is fairly low and unreliable that I find it not really worth taking outside of large dungeon pulls. Our next ability is Largesse, which is a replacement for Divine Seal, and Largesse is a terrible name. I hate the name of this ability, but its effect is pretty good. This will increase your healing magic potency by 20% for 20 seconds. If we're comparing this to how Divine Seal used to be for White Mages, it lasts slightly longer, it is less potent, and it also has a 90-second cooldown as opposed to 60 seconds. While I found Divine Seal far more beneficial, this tool is still helpful and now available for the other two healers as well. It's just a shame that, again, it's another ability that had to be stripped from White Mage to be thrown into the role action category, but that is a rant for another video. It's worth noting that this will only affect healing spells. We've been talking a lot about the amazing abilities that White Mage has, and Largesse will have no effect on those abilities. That counts things such as Tetragrammaton or Size, things like that. However, when you need to output large amounts of single target or AoE heals, having this to bolster your cures or medica spells will go a long way in keeping everyone healthy. 90 seconds is still a rather fair cooldown timer as well, so you shouldn't be too reserved in using this often throughout a fight. Our next ability is Surecast, and this will allow your next spells to be uninterruptible and will also nullify most knockback and pull-in effects for 5 seconds. This ability sits only on a 30-second cooldown. This ability has quickly become one of my favorite tools to take from the role action category. There have been a lot more bosses with knockback effects in Stormblood, and having this tool at your disposal to help really nullify those knockbacks is extremely helpful. Not only will this help you keep up with your casts, but it will also prevent you from getting knocked out of position, and it's a good ability all around in fights that you know will knock you back. There are lots of fights in Omega that knock you back. Even dungeon bosses have begun having knockback effects, so this ability is extremely helpful, and I highly recommend it for certain fights where it will be applicable. The other effect, prevents you from being interrupted. I'm pretty sure Paralyze still is completely, it goes through Surecast is what I'm trying to say. I'm pretty sure if you have paralysis and it would stun you, it will still interrupt your cast that way. As for attacks that actually interrupt your casts, I don't actually remember any off the top of my head in recent times that have actually interrupted my casts. The last ones I can think of are like fireballs back in Twintania, so yeah, I'm not sure how useful that part of Surecast is for healers, but I definitely know that nullifying knockbacks has been extremely helpful, and I really do like this tool in fights where there are constant knockback effects. So just keep that in mind. If there's fights that have knockback effects, think about taking Surecast. And now we have to talk about Rescue. Okay, we finally got to this ability. This acts sort of as a reverse version of Black Mage's Ethereal Manipulation. It allows you to pull a party member towards you into your position. And as you can imagine, this can be a very annoying tool for trolling people by pulling them into harmful effects or even off of certain arenas, such as Titan. The more practical use of this ability is for you to pull party members out of harmful effects, However, due to the amount of attention and actual brain power it actually takes to notice 1. Our party member standing in the wrong spot, 2. Target them, and then 3. Also use this ability in time for them to be pulled into safety, it really doesn't usually pan out very well. I've never actually had a fight call for a strategy that relies strictly on the use of rescue, and even then its cooldown of 2.5 minutes really kind of rules out any possibility of having fights where you would need rescue. So I don't know. I really never take this ability. It's really just there as a troll ability for right now. Maybe they can change it to make it better. I don't know. It's there. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's there. And yeah, having talked through all the role actions, let's briefly talk about which ones I recommend that you take. I always take Lucid Dreaming, Largess, and Swiftcast. These abilities are extremely helpful and versatile. There's really no excuse not to have them. They're extremely helpful, and they apply to basically every fight. Isuna is mandatory in the fights where dispelling debuffs is important, but if you do not have any effects that are dispellable or don't need to dispel anything, it is really just dead weight. But again, if you cannot remember or you're going into a fresh fight not knowing what's going to happen, you should have Isuna on your bar just in case. You should have a protect on all party members, but after it's been cast, usually recommend switching it out for something else, that being Cleric Stance or maybe Surecast, with Cleric Stance being preferred if there aren't any actual knockback effects in the fight. I rarely bother taking Break, Eye for an Eye, or Rescue, but if there's a strategy your party makes that relies on one of those abilities, feel free to take them. Okay, and before we move on to the rest of the guide, I'd just like to take this time to give a big thanks to our sponsors for this video. Yes, we actually have sponsors this time, 2 of them, and they are Laziness and Procrastination. Without these 2, this video would have been released about 9 months ago, and you know, just after spending so much time being supported by these 2 during high school, I'm so glad that they've become a part of my hobby here on YouTube as well. In fact, thanks to them, I've been able to put off finishing this script for like the last 2 weeks. You know, just big shout out to them. Much thanks, much love. Thank you, Laziness and Procrastination. Okay, spells and abilities have been talked about, role action abilities have been talked about. Now we need to address the healing gauge, a new mechanic added to the White Mage as of Stormblood. The healing gauge allows you to build up lilies by using either Cure or Cure 2 while in battle. These lilies will be expended when using any one of these abilities: Asylum, Assize, Tetragrammaton, or Divine Benison. Using one of these abilities while having lilies will reduce that ability's cooldown based on the amount of lilies you had stored in your healing gauge. 1 lily will reduce your cooldown by 4%, 2 lilies will reduce it by 10%, and 3 by 20%. While the cooldown reductions of these abilities is nice, the cooldowns of these abilities are already fairly short, with Asylum having the longest at 90 seconds. And even though I consider Assize to be the best of these abilities, it is wrong to hold on to it, or any ability for that matter, until you have a full gauge just to get the benefit of a longer cooldown reduction. If there is a good place to use your abilities and they are off cooldown, you should not hesitate to use them regardless of how many lilies you have. I also mentioned that it is nearly worthless to have Divine Benison's cooldown reduced, since it already has such a short cooldown of 30 seconds, and even having a full gauge of lilies will only reduce that by 6 seconds. Even so, I would not hesitate to use Divine Benison if I had 3 lilies, if there was a tank buster and I wanted to use Divine Benison. It's just the way it is. You should not be determining whether or not you use or don't use abilities just based on how many lilies you have inside of your healing gauge. Moving forward, I want to actually talk about a couple of terms and techniques before we move on to the healing section of this guide. The first being Overhealing. This is probably quite self-explanatory. It is very simply healing for more than the amount of HP missing of a party member. It is sometimes unavoidable that you'll overheal at times when keeping party members topped off, especially with regens and Medica too, but with single target especially, you should be trying your best not to overheal too much. Overhealing will end up wasting your MP with all of the healing that was unnecessary, and will also net you unwanted enmity It is never fun to pull the boss's attention just in time to take a tank buster to the face. Since White Mage in particular has a large variety of spells and abilities to fit differing situations, it's important to know when to use your more modest toolkit to save yourself MP in enmity. Newer healers need not cast a heal as soon as their tank takes the smallest amount of damage. Learn how to use your spells to the fullest whilst without wasting MP, and when you don't need to heal yet, you could maybe throw out some DPS if you are comfortable. Another topic I would like to discuss is precasting, which is the act of preemptively casting your heals to deal with the incoming damage as soon as it registers, rather than waiting to see the damage take effect before reacting and beginning to cast your heals. This is an extremely helpful technique that will help you keep on top of your heals and keep your party healthy. A lot of big party-wide attacks and tank busters have cast times or animations to let you know when big damage is coming. Being able to identify these big attacks and take advantage of the timing of the boss's attacks will let you cast the appropriate spells to have your heals land as soon as possible. It may take you a bit of practice to get into the rhythm of the fight and to properly time your heals so that they do not go off prematurely, but once you master precasting, it is an invaluable technique. I highly recommend focus targeting the boss so that you can always see their cast bars, as well as learning the names of tank busters and party-wide attacks so that you can apply precasting. This can be especially important when dealing with constant high amounts of damage or when you need the party to be topped up for certain fight mechanics. You can also apply this to DPS spells, taking advantage of countdown timers to precast your spells so that they land as soon as the boss is pulled and such. Practice with precasting your spells and you'll have a great method for keeping up with the pace in all of your fights. And the next thing I would like to talk about in this section really quickly is Stutter Stepping, and how you can apply this to gain a little bit more mobility in the fight. Stutter Stepping is the act of beginning to move near the end of your cast to try and fit in some movement in between your casts. You'll find that starting to move after your cast is about 85% to 90% finished, depending on the actual cast time of the spell, you can begin moving and still finish the cast even though you technically didn't finish the cast before you started moving. This does take some practice to pull off properly, and the possible mistake of moving too early can completely interrupt your cast, and if that heal is vital to someone's survival, yeah, that can be pretty bad. Now, Stutter Stepping isn't as vital for White Mage, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and learn it. You have access to things like Arrow 2, Regen, and also using Swift Cast, which will open up an entire GCD of movements. But when you don't have those things or don't need to apply those things, it is useful to be able to stutter step if you need to move a little bit to get into position for a mechanic or to move out of harmful effects. Stutter stepping is extremely important. I highly recommend that you practice and learn this ability. Okay, we've talked about a lot of things, but now I think we should try and talk about some single target healing. To start things off, if you know you won't be needing Divine Benison for a specific mechanic, it is okay to have this casted on the tank pre-pull to help them eat some damage before they need their first heal. This can open up opportunity for them to collect mobs together for large pulls, so you won't accidentally pull aggro off of them by healing them in between, or for you to throw out some DPS spells without having to worry about needing to heal them. When it comes to healing, it's good practice to have Regen up at all times on the main tank. I know I talked about overhealing in this section before, but Regen is kind of the golden exception here, as the spell is designed for MP efficiency and won't give you a huge spike in enmity as it does its healing over 21 seconds. Having the Regen effect on your tank will help keep a constant bit of healing on them if you ever need to focus on healing another party member, or so that you can add some DPS spells without having to worry about them not having enough healing. And in high damage phases, obviously having Regen ticking will be a big help in helping keeping your tank alive in between your casts. Having casted Regen, you should try your best to default to Cure as much as possible for MP efficiency, casting it when your tank is missing a small to moderate amount of HP. However, if you are comfortable allowing your tank to dip lower, you can opt to use Cure 2 more often to allow yourself more time for adding more DPS. This is obviously less MP efficient and a bit riskier, but it can allow you to use more damage spells in between your heals if you don't believe you'll have any trouble with MP and can afford the risk of having your tank dip lower in HP. And obviously, if your tank is taking a lot of damage and cure isn't enough to be keeping them healthy, falling back onto cure 2 to get them back up is completely appropriate when they are missing a moderate to large amount of HP. When your abilities are off of cooldown, you might not even need to use cure or cure 2. I still highly recommend having regen up at all times on your tank, but if your abilities like Tetragrammaton, Assize, Asylum, or even Benediction are off cooldown, you can plan to use those abilities instead of normal cure spells to deal with the damage your tank is taking. Use Asylum as a sort of an extra regen effect, casting it where your tank is standing, and making sure they're okay to stand in that same spot for a while so that they don't waste it, and using things like Tetragrammaton and Assize in between GCDs of DPS spells is completely valid. Also, again, if you know you won't be needing Divine Benison for any tank busters or anything like that, it is completely fine to be using these off cooldown just to help eat up some of the damage your tank is taking and reduce the amount of healing they will end up needing. And obviously, in more healing intensive phases, these abilities are there to help keep party members healthy alongside of your normal spells. Largesse is also important because it will increase the potency of your normal spells. Having a largesse buffed regen is always nice to have, and having it make your cures better is great for dealing with large amounts of damage. Just remember that largesse will not affect your healing abilities. When it comes to single target healing, another side of things is also what your tank is doing. Perception is extremely important as a healer. Knowing where your party members are, knowing what the boss is doing and what attack they'll be using next, and also paying attention to what your tank is doing and what cooldowns they are using. Good tanks will make use of their defensive cooldowns during healing intensive phases to help take the edge off for their healers. However, some tanks will not have any good cooldowns for the situation, or they might be needing them for a certain phase later on, or they really just might be incompetent. It happens sometimes when you're going through random parties. It just does. When your tank is using a good cooldown, you can use these opportunities to save some of your own, and maybe even take advantage in the reduction of damage being taken to throw out some extra DPS. A prime example is when Paladins cast Hallowed Ground, as it is essentially a free 10 seconds for you to do whatever you want. Catch up on heals, throw out DPS, reposition. Even something like Sentinel or Vengeance or Shadow Wall are extremely potent defensive cooldowns and offer lots of breathing room for healers. On the flip side, if you're noticing that your tank has no cooldowns to offer, you might want to start considering using some of your own to help with the healing intensive phases or extremely tricky dungeon large pulls. Largesse is amazing for spell bolstering, as we mentioned before, by having things like Tetragrammaton, Divine Benison, and Benediction in your pocket just in case will definitely help and go a long way in case your tank dips too low that your spells just can't keep up with him. Keeping a close eye on your tank and using your own cooldowns to help fill in the gaps where tanks won't have their own defensive cooldowns is extremely important as a healer. Now, the majority of the damage being taken should be by your tank, but there will be times when other party members will take damage too, and it's at this time when you should be mindful of the situation and act accordingly. Sometimes DPS just pull aggro off the tank, sometimes DPS stand in an attack they weren't supposed to be standing in, and sometimes fight mechanics will just target a non-tank. In the situations where other party members have taken damage, you should consider the following. Your priority is obviously keeping your entire party alive, so make sure that if you are going to heal someone other than the main tank, that the main tank will still survive the division of attention. If the other party members who took damage will not need their HP filled in order to survive the following mechanics, it is also acceptable to delay on healing them if you feel like there is something more important for you to be doing. As long as a party member has at least one of their HP remaining, they are still at their full effectiveness, so long as they do not drop to 0. You may not feel comfortable leaving party members at less than full HP, but sometimes it can be a good play to delay their heals in favor of something else if you think it is more important. Obviously, you don't want to leave your party members at less than full HP for too long, as having a full HP bar can allow for more mistakes to be made without a full death, and the less HP someone has, the more likely they are to die. But if you are confident in your party, you can take some risks where appropriate. If you are in a full party with another healer, you can work to assign different tasks to prioritize so that the party stays healthy. Assigning someone to focus more on the main tank while the other focuses on spot healing is one example. DPS can also equip certain abilities to help with their own survivability as well. Things such as Second Wind, Bloodbath, and even Vercure can go a long way in allowing DPS to heal themselves and self-sustain themselves in the situations where you're just too preoccupied to be able to throw them heals at the moment. Working together as a party is extremely important. When it comes to AoE healing, this is a little simpler. You have 3 spells to deal with AoE damage: Medica, Medica 2, and Cure 3. You also have some abilities to help as well, with a Size, Asylum, Planetary Indulgence, and also Largesse will make your spells better. Medica 2 is always a solid choice for AoE damage and is actually, admittedly, my go-to spell. It does a smaller amount of healing than the other 2 at first, but over its full duration does more than Medica or Cure 3. Even if the tail end of your Medica 2's regen may end up overhealing, it can be a much better choice than Cure 3 in a lot of cases, considering that it has an extended range of 20 yalms, and also because it is more MP efficient. It is great for casting first when the party is taking constant or consecutive party-wide damage. But in the cases where Medica 2 isn't enough on its own, or you can't rely on waiting the 30 seconds for Medica 2's full potency, adding something like Planetary Indulgence or Size, or even more regen from Asylum can help your party heal up. If you need to, you can also throw in a Medica or Cure 3 on top of that. Lots of mechanics will reduce your party down to 1 HP, and then you will need to race to top the party off in order for you to survive the next incoming attack. Having a Medica 2 to start and then adding something on top is always a solid choice. When the party takes a small amount of damage but you still want to top them up, something smaller like in a Size or just a Medica spell can be enough. And when the party takes a big spike of damage and you need them to be topped off really fast and can't wait to rely on the regen of Medica 2, Cure 3's massive 550 potency is sometimes the sole answer for that. At the end of the day, Medica 2 is really amazing for most forms of party-wide damage. It is more MP efficient and heals more than Cure 3 if left to take full effect, but still, make sure to take advantage of other options when they are more applicable. If the damage isn't too severe, something like a single cast of Medica or an Size or Asylum can be enough. Casting Medica 2 too often can lead to a lot of wasted MP if you end up using a 700 potency heal for all types of party-wide damage, especially on smaller amounts of party-wide damage. Okay, we've talked about healing, but you don't always need to be healing, and when you don't need to be healing, it's a good opportunity for you to be DPSing. So let's go ahead and address DPSing as a white mage. With the changes to healer DPS in Stormblood, healer DPS now scales off of mind, and you no longer have to deal with the activation of Cleric Stance to be able to deal respectable damage. This lowers the risk of casting DPS spells, but for some healers they are just still too timid when it comes to doing so. However, I must highly recommend that you practice and get comfortable with casting DPS spells when you do not need to be throwing out heals. If you find yourself standing around not casting anything, you are wasting potential time that could be spent adding DPS to the party and making fights last shorter. When it comes to DPS as a white mage, it is fairly simple. For single target DPS, applying Arrow 3 and Arrow 2 before moving into Stone 4 spam until you need to reapply your dots is basically as complex as it gets. A Size can also be used to add DPS, although bear in mind that the heal and MP restoration effect before just strictly using it as a DPS tool. You can also use Presence of Mind to increase the rate of your DPS spells, and the new effective Cleric Stance will give you a flat 5% extra damage while it is active. Now when it comes for AoE damage, this is where things get really fun. Holy will do a lot of AoE damage, although it is staggered for each consecutive enemy. Holy will also stun, and this stun can act as a good form of damage mitigation, because would you know it, stunned enemies can't attack your tank. This basically means that as long as you get off your first holy, you're free to cast at least 2 more holies, as the stun will keep reapplying until they begin to get stun resistance. Now for large dungeon pulls, it is good practice to have regen on the tank, possibly also throwing down something like Asylum and Divine Benison. It is also extremely safe to have Tetragrammaton or Benediction in your pocket, just in case the tank takes more damage than you were anticipating. Now with those things in place, hopefully with a solid defensive cooldown from the tank, you can start off with your first holy cast. If you have Swift Cast, you can get this off instantly, and use that time waiting for your next GCD to pop things like Presence of Mind, Cleric Stance, or something like Thin Air. After my first holy, I actually like to cast Arrow 3 before moving on to spamming just more holy. A Size is also amazing for DPS, as it will gave you the full amount of 300 potency across all your enemies, unlike Holy, which staggers down to a half potency after the 6th enemy. Now when it comes down to it, just a handful of holy spells in a size and an arrow 3 will actually add a lot of extra DPS to your party and will make large pulls go much faster. And the faster large pulls go, the less time you have to spam heals on your tank because he runs out of defensive cooldowns. Also remember that you have tools like Thin Air and Lucid Dreaming to help offset the large MP costs of Holy. Now, in the case that you and your tank are running low on good defensive abilities, you should consider stopping DPS to focus on keeping your tank alive. In a lot of cases, large pulls are actually the areas in dungeons where the tank will be taking the most damage, rather than the boss fights themselves where the damage is a lot more controlled and predictable. Having 7+ enemies attacking the tank all at once is just a constant amount of large damage, so both you and the tank should not be stingy with using your best cooldowns in these large pulls. Remember that whether it's in a boss fight, a large dungeon pull, or a raid, DPS is never more important than keeping your party alive. If a party member dies, it will always be a huge loss in overall party DPS, and if that death chains into a party wipe, all the damage you did ends up not mattering in the end. DPS smartly, and if you need to heal, then stop and heal. Okay, so throughout this entire guide, you've heard me talk a lot about MP management and conservation. Now a lot of that is really just my mindset left over from playing White Mage back in Realm Reborn and in Heavensward, because as it is now, White Mage has ironically become the healer with the most MP longevity in Stormblood. However, that doesn't mean you can just go around casting things without a care in the world and ignoring your MP. White Mage has a lot of different tools designed to fit different situations, and there are always spells that are more MP efficient than others. Regen is extremely potent and can be great for keeping a small constant heal on your tank and healing a larger amount of HP over its full duration than even Cure 2. Medica 2 similarly does a lot of healing over time and heals more and costs less than Cure 3. Using Cure over Cure 2 will be more MP efficient at the cost of possibly using more GCDs. Aside from choosing more MP efficient spells, White Mage has several abilities to manipulate their MP. Lucid Dreaming, like we discussed before, will restore 6,720 MP at level 70 over its full duration, and should be used as soon as you can gain its full MP without waste, and then consistently off cooldown throughout the fight to keep your MP healthy. Other than that, you have access to a size which, on top of having good party heal and good AoE damage, will restore 10% of your maximum MP with every cast. This, along with Lucid Dreaming, is already really good for restoring all of your lost MP, but you can also completely negate your MP cost with Thin Air like we discussed before. The spells that cost the most MP to cast will be your AoE heals, Holy, and Raise. Whenever you find yourself needing to cast any of those, especially multiple AoE heals in a row or multiple Holy casts in a row, you should highly consider using Thin Air if it is off cooldown. Even using Thin Air on a single Medica 2 and just a handful of cures or stone spells will save you several thousand MP over the course of a fight if you're using Thin Air every couple of minutes. And while you might find it somewhat rare aside from spamming a large amount of holy spells in a row, if you ever find yourself running low on MP due to the amount of DPS you are outputting, always remember to save enough MP for healing, even if it means stopping DPS until you can get some of your MP back. While a good healer will find every opportunity to help with DPS when they don't need to heal, DPSing so much that you no longer have enough MP to heal can too lead to party deaths, and a death will certainly be a bigger loss in overall party DPS than you holding off on that last holy cast. And if your lack of healing leads to a wipe, all of that DPS meaningless in the end. So please be smart with your MP. White Mage is certainly well equipped for conserving and restoring their MP, but reckless casting and bad usage of your abilities can lead you to becoming MP starved if you aren't smart. Use your spells efficiently, limit overhealing, and use abilities like Lucid and Thin Air to your advantage to keep your MP at a healthy amount. It's also worth noting that other jobs can aid you in restoring your MP. Bards and Machinists can take the role action Refresh, which restores a whole 6,000 MP to every party member over the course of 30 seconds. This can be casted once every 3 minutes. Casters can take Mana Shift to transfer 20% of their MP over to you, although it can be quite detrimental to their DPS to do so, so you shouldn't count on this too often. Astrologians can also draw and use the Ur card, which can restore a varying amount of MP depending on the different effects and durations of the card. Just be smart with your MP, work with your party, and make sure you have enough MP to finish the fight. Alright, and for the final section of the guide, we need to talk about stats and stat priority. I've actually made a separate video on my thoughts on healer stats before in the past, and my thoughts haven't changed that much since then, but I'll go over them here for White Mage. First off, weapon damage is the most powerful stat, followed by mind. These will naturally go up with item level, and more of the nuance comes in with the secondary stats and what you choose to meld into your gear. So let's talk about those. Piety is a healer specific stat that will simply increase your maximum MP pool. This plays a part in your MP management in some ways other than just having more MP at the start of a fight. You naturally gain 2% of your maximum MP every few seconds while in combat, and that goes up to 6% outside of combat. White mages also gain 10% of their maximum MP with every cast of a size, so having more piety and more MP can go a long way. However, I think that with how White Mage is in Stormblood, they really do have little problems managing MP if played smartly. Piety can always be nice to have, and I admittedly like seeing how high I can get my MP pool, but I don't think that Piety is as effective as other secondary stats. Spell speed is probably the weakest stat for White Mages. This will reduce the cast time of your spells, lower your GCD, and also increase the potency of your healing over time and damage over time abilities. Spell speed sounds like it would be great for reactive healing and dealing with unexpected damage, but when it comes to faster cast times and lower GCDs, it actually takes a huge and asinine amount of spell speed to even make a noticeable difference. Not to mention that White Mage has tools for dealing with unexpected damage quickly with instant cast abilities like Tetragrammaton, a Size, or Benediction. They also have Presence of Mind to increase cast speeds, and spell speed really doesn't offer much after all is said and done. Spell speed will indeed increase the effectiveness of healing and damage over time effects, but so will other secondary stats that also affect normal spells as well, like Determination, which is a small and flat increase to your effectiveness of your healing and DPS. This stat isn't very flashy, is very straightforward, and unfortunately there really isn't much more to say about it. It is very simply a small and reliable increase to everything. Critical hit rate increases your rate for getting critical heals or doing critical damage, and will also increase the effectiveness of crits. This stat is fairly unreliable, but does increase your healing and DPS. A critical heal can be very helpful, and it certainly feels good when a critical heal comes in clutch or when you're just falling behind in healing for whatever reason, but again, it is not very reliable. You can't force heals to crit, and whenever you're going to heal, you will heal and choose your proper spell or ability for the damage that has been taken, and will always assume your heals will not crit. You wouldn't see your tank at half health and cast Cure expecting it to crit. No, you would just cast Cure 2 or cast Cure alongside of Tetragrammaton or something else to that effect. Crits are nice, but unreliable, and obviously critting a DPS spell, it's just purely beneficial. It is also worth noting that crit does have some small synergy with White Mage with the trait Secret of the Lily 2. With this trait, when you crit heal with Cure or Cure 2, you will have a 20% chance to reduce the cooldown of Asylum or Size by 5 seconds. I'm not a huge fan of this trait, as it requires a lot of hoops for you to jump through for it to even have a chance of being useful, and honestly, when it does trigger, you likely won't even notice. Despite this, I think crit on its own stands up just fine as a solid choice. Aside from those 4 stats that you'll find on healer gear, there are 2 others that you can get by melding them onto your gear, which can provide you with some benefit. Direct hit rate can be melded onto your gear and will increase your rate of direct hitting and direct critting. This is a great stat which will increase your DPS, but only that. Since you cannot direct hit a heal, it has no effect on your healing spells whatsoever, and therefore I do not really like this stat for healers. It can be nice to increase DPS, yes, but I would much rather take a stat like critical hit rate, which will affect all of my spells, instead of something that is only helpful when I am DPSing. And the other stat that you can meld only onto your accessories is Vitality. Vitality will increase your maximum HP, which aside from the satisfaction of seeing your HP go higher, has limited uses. You do gain a small percentage of your HP back every few seconds, just like with the MP, but unlike with MP, where you have limited tools for restoring it, you, as a healer, have a wide variety of tools for restoring HP. It can be argued that Vitality does absolutely nothing for you unless you are surviving with the tiniest sliver of HP that your extra Vitality that you melded provided. But it is there, and it is an option for you to meld onto your accessories should you want it. So, out of all of those stats, which do I prefer and which do I recommend? I personally prefer to focus on either critical hit rate or determination. In my healer stats video that I did several months ago, I said that I was leaning more toward determination, but now I've begun to lean more toward critical hit rate. And it really just comes down to preference there. Critical hit rate has some synergy with your toolkit, as well as with Scholar if you happen to share gear with it. It is rather unreliable and inconsistent though, but overall it is an increase to your DPS and healing on average. Determination is a more consistent and reliable increase, although with little less potential than crit. After those two, I would personally say that Piety is nice to have but not necessary. Spell speed really isn't worth going out of your way for. Direct hit is a nice increase to DPS but useless for heals, so I personally do not recommend it over something like crit. And Vitality can be nice if you want a little more HP, but again, isn't necessary. And with that, we've covered all the major things I've wanted to cover. Yeah, it's been a long day of scripting and recording, but we did it. And we did it about 9 months late, but it is finally done now. If you were waiting for this guide for a while, and now that it's here and finished it feels somewhat underwhelming and even disappointing, then I really apologize for putting you through the same emotions you felt during the release of Eureka again. As a person who's been playing healers since the beginning of A Realm Reborn, I fully support aspiring healers and players in general who look to improve themselves. The fact that you are watching a guide shows interest in learning and becoming a better player, and I already have a massive amount of respect for you. Please continue to improve and have fun playing Final Fantasy XIV. And as an additional note for healers, it can be tough sometimes. A good healer is very perceptive and it requires a lot of flexibility and adaptability. We as healers can often not be appreciated quite as much as the responsibility we have, but know that I, as a fellow healer, commend and appreciate you very much. A good healer can be the difference between a close recovery and a wipe, and when we do manage to pull through the most out of a bad situation and turn that into a successful run, it can feel extremely good, and it is personally way more rewarding than any feeling I've ever had playing a DPS or a tank. Keep at it, practice, and become a healer so good that the DPS and tanks will be forced to acknowledge how great you are. Well, alright then, if you made it through this extremely long guide, then I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful to help you along your way to playing White Mage. I will be making guides for Scholar and Astrologian in the future, although I can't really promise when I'll be finishing those considering just how long it took me to finish this one. I also post plenty of gameplay videos. I have a let's play of myself leveling an alt character, and I post plenty of other Final Fantasy XIV content if you're interested in subscribing and supporting me further. And yeah, that's all I got. Thank you for watching again, and I'll hopefully see you guys in another video. Until then, sayonara, bye bye. Protect increases the magic and physical defense of all party members and lasts for 30 minutes. Minutes? Really, Tsuki? Oh my god. Oh my god. The script is 11,000 words long. What is wrong with me? Why is it so long? Alright, let's do another take.